Good evening or good afternoon. This is the lesson on pivot tables. The purpose of the lesson is to introduce pivot tables, their functionality and their features. The objectives which I'll cover will explain what a table pivot is for and what it is, explain the features and options, demonstrate how to build a pivot table, and then demonstrate some common things to look out for, some common pitfalls. The lessons will also touch on a bit of conditional formatting, which is a related lesson. So, looking at the sample database that accompanies the series of lessons, we're going to demonstrate a pivot table by using the information in front of us. So, pivot tables are used to examine data held in a table, allowing intelligent analysis and then presentation in graphical form. What is more, once they are set up, they can be refreshed every time that the data changes, which in turn automatically updates the table and the associated graphics. One thing I'll add for now is that if you are using a Mac, which in this case we know that is the case, there are some features which won't work, and obviously the look will be different, but we'll work through it as we go. Two of the features in question, one is actually how graphics are made directly from the pivot table. So I'll show you how it's done in the PC version, and then we can see how we fare with the Mac version. And there is another feature which allows you to automatically import data in. I won't demonstrate that during the lesson, but we'll explore that when we have our lesson tomorrow. So, to create a pivot table, follow these steps. So select the table range A1 to U47. So looking up the table now, see my cursor. It's going to go to A1 cell and then just simply drag it down. There's a number of ways you can select the table. You can do it this way if it's not a very big table, which it isn't in this case. And that's selecting a table. Or you can click in the top left hand corner and again that will select the whole table. Now, things to look out for. The columns here have all got to have a header, basically. If one of these columns was blank, then the pivot table would pick up an error and it won't let you insert it. So, to insert a pivot table from here, you go to the Insert tab, which is up the top here. And then you see there's three options here. So you're looking at this one here, which is Pivot Table. And you click on that. It then gives you a number of options, so you can select the range, which we just highlighted. But what you could actually do is, if you went directly to this option, you could simply fill in the pivot table range yourself. So you can, in this case, it's a sample database, which is the name of the sheet, and then it's a cell reference A1 to X47, and just as an aside, the dollar signs there indicate that it's an absolute reference. In other words, it's fixing it to that particular range. Now, an option that might not be available on the Mac, but it is here. You can go and use an external source, which I can demonstrate maybe at a later point. What you can do as well is you can drop this into a new worksheet, so it'll set up another tab here in a second, or you can drop it into an existing worksheet where you select the location, basically just allowing you to place it where you want to. Data models is a bit more complicated when you start to add multiple sources of data together to work on much bigger, more complex issues, and we'll cover that some other time. So if I click OK now, it then creates another sheet, which in this case is called Sheet 2, and it drops this view here, which is where the pivot table will actually be built. It's called Pivot Table 1. You can rename it if you want to up here, if that's convenient. And then down here you have a list of all of the fields that were in that table of data. You can change the view of this by going into the settings here. So you can see it just changes how it looks basically. So we can do that. It all depends on what you're comfortable with, what works for you. So back to that one. One of the boxes shows the field that can be dragged into one of the four below. So filters, for example, if I take gender and I drag it by clicking and pulling into filters, And you can see two things. One, first of all, it actually drops something into that box, which allows you options here, and then also it puts it up here in this top corner. You can add as many filters as you want, and what this will allow you to do, which you can demonstrate later, is it allows you to really hone down on a search for a particular set or classification of data, and we'll get to see this later on. You can set, for example, here you can have the location, you can have the grade, the kind of group things that you can do at that level, where you can filter out if you're not interested in particular grades, or if you're only interested in male or female members of staff, or if you're interested in a particular department, and so forth. So rows, what you can do is this box down here is used to set the rows of the pivot table. Multiple fields can be placed into this box. So in this case we're going to drag and drop department and grade in there. So if we take that in here, and then you start to see that department appears on the left hand side. Now there's no figures to this yet because we haven't started to build the rest of the table. But if I was to pick grade as well, you can see that what it does is it offsets. So you have little minus symbols, so you can collapse that if you want to, or you can expand it. You can get rid of those buttons by clicking on a symbol up here, which gets rid of them, and introduce them if you want. It all depends on how you want to present your table. So into the columns box. Now this one here is used to insert headers. So basically, if you want to separate out the figures that you get in the box, you can separate out in different headers. So we're going to drag the location into there, which is here. And now what you can see is we're now starting to build more of the table, although again we haven't got figures in just yet. So we've got departments, we've got grades, so they're the grades of staff. We've got different countries in this case across the top, and then we've got a filter here should we wish to separate out between male and female. So the next one then is the important box, I suppose, is the values. So again, this very much depends upon what you're trying to find out. In this case, I'm just going to drop in serial number, and there should be a unique serial number for every person. So now you start to see the value of the table. So we can already see, for example, in England, there are 4 people in the compliance department. You can then see there's a total of 11 people based in England, 10 in the Republic of Ireland, 6 in Northern Ireland, etc. So you can start to get useful information from the table. So the resultant table can be adjusted and changed depending upon what it is you're trying to analyse. In the case of the example, as we say, we can see the departments that exist, we can see the numbers and grades of staff in the department and which location they're in. If we apply the filter, we can see how many are male, and you can see the separation there, and then also the same breakdown. And if we do it to female, then we can again see the breakdown of female staff in there. So just clear that back off. The next piece of I've called it magic here, but it's depends on what the computer will allow you to do. But you can normally insert a chart. Now, if I go up to insert again, and you can see the chart section in the middle. Now, if I do click on, say, a bar chart, certainly you can pick from a range of different options, but I'm just going to pick a 2D bar chart. Now, it doesn't look particularly special, but what it does is it automatically selects the data from the table. Now, I do believe it won't do this for the Mac, but we'll give it a go and see what happens. But in the case of PC, or the version of Excel for PC, then it produces this. Now you'll also notice that it has the same filters, so you can filter on here. Now when you do that, so if I go to the filter up here, filter for females, it will filter the graph at the same time. If I come back down and select all, let's say we don't want to have. Now the interesting choice here actually is you can select the field to filter. So in this case it's looking at department, so it's showing all the different departments here, and I can chop and choose. So if I just do compliance, my graph changes into something rather simple, which tells me that in fact the English or people based in England are in 2 particular grades, grades D and E. Same for the Republic of Ireland. The Welsh have only grade A's, and Scotland has grade B's. So what you can do, however, if you go back to this, and I select them all for a moment, then what you can do is you can drop down this arrow and it allows you to choose the other option of the grades. So again, you can pick and choose depending upon what you want to do. So managing pivot tables, some key points. A pivot table once established will save a great deal of time and effort, but there are several things you need to be aware of when dealing with them. When you're in an active worksheet, you can see at the top of a tab marked Pivot Table Tools. So you'll see it's indicated now up here. If I click off, now bearing in mind it's just disappeared, so to see that tab again, you just click on the table and it shows you. So you can see a range of options to help you manage the table. So here we've got a number of things, but most importantly here is refresh. When you import new data or when you change your data, so if I was to go in here and change some of the information in this table, it will not automatically pull through to the pivot table. I will have to click on refresh, either there or right click and refresh in this case. Now you can set it up if you look at options, and you can go to data. There's a little box here which says you can refresh the data when opening the file. There may be times when you want to do that, there may be times when you don't want to do that. It's an option you can choose. In any event, never forget to refresh the data when you've made some changes, otherwise it'll be incorrect. So changing the data source. So the data source at the moment, we know this is this table here. You can end up adding a few rows, in which case the pivot table, when you refresh, won't see it because it's only looking at a specific range. So if you look here under data source, change source, it's telling you the range it's looking at. So if I was to increase that, to let's say we'll do it to 50 just to be on the round side. So all I'm doing is I'm adding an extra couple of rows. Now you can do the same by increasing the column letters. So if I click out here, so Y, Z, etc. So if I had another column on here, unless I change that, it won't pick it up. Now you can just simply highlight the table again, or you can go in and do what I've just done now, which is just adjust the figures. So that's a nice easy way to do that. So if I click OK, now if I refresh, there is actually another serial number that's been added in there at the bottom of the table, but there's no other change really. But you must do that if your data changes. Now there are other ways to get around it. Again, not so sure with the Mac version, but if you have an automatic connection to a file, it usually just imports the whole lot anyway, so you won't have to worry about that. If you have a table set up, so this is a slightly different way of looking at this. So at the moment this is simply a range of data, but for example if I was to highlight this now and do insert table, and then what it's going to do is it's going to change it into a recognized table. It just wants me to take the filters off first, so if I just do that, I'll remove the filters. So insert table. Okay, so what it's done now is it's simply changed this, and it's called a table 1. Again, you can change that name, but that means that if your pivot table refers to table 1, then it doesn't matter how big this table gets, as long as so if I go here and say let's say country again, you can see it's already adding a column, and as long as I set, if I go back to my pivot table, if I go to change data source, let's say that I go table 1, let's see if this works. Okay, so that's interesting. So what I've done is the data disappeared from the pivot table, and I was just having a quick look to see why that happened. And the reason is that when I selected the table, I've managed to miss off all these columns. Now that's quite handy, really, because what it means is I can go in, and you have a button here called Table Tools, and you can go to Resize Table, and then that will give me an option. And you see here it's got the size of the table there. So if I go in and go A instead of F and click OK, it'll now resize my table for me. So a little bit of a mistake there, but it's a good teaching point. So now if I do this, it should give me the serials again, which I can drop in, and I can drop those genders in, and then it starts to populate again. So we're kind of veering off stage, I think, because of the helpfulness of going into tables, but essentially we're looking at the pivot table there, and we were looking at setting the data source, which we've changed into a table, and proved it can update automatically, and also the importance of refreshing. So the other thing to do when you refresh is occasionally it will add new filters and remove them. So here, when you drop down on here, sometimes it will, let's say there was a computer department that was introduced, so instead of IT there was another category, it would show that unticked. So you need to just check to make sure that you haven't missed anything out on those, and the same with the other filters. So it's always useful to have a look at that. So other things you can do, you can rename columns. So you can, let's say you want to call this, I don't know, ENG if you want to shorten it. Oops, ENG. And you might want to call that NI, ROI, Scott, Wales. So you can change that. It means that when you come to format your table, you can make it look however you want to, really. You can change things. So I'm now going up to the formatting tab, and if I can center them, I can change the colors of the labels. It's entirely up to you. But you can rename those things there, and you can even rename some of these as well, and some of the row labels and some of the headers. So that's quite useful. As mentioned, you can format the cells any way you please. If you want to, you can add borders. You can add colors if you want to. Let's get that back out because it doesn't look nice. Again, it's entirely up to you. I think what it's for is that if you want to just use this directly in a presentation or a document, then you can get it ready so it looks very aesthetically pleasing to enable you to do that. You can remove the totals on the side. So we showed a view of removing the plus buttons here. Again, similar things. You can remove the field headers if you want to. You can go in and let me just check out where we are with this. Yep, so here you can go into subtotals and grand totals, so you can switch them off and on for rows and columns. So if you just run through, takes out there, so you just got them at the bottom, or you can put them on for rows and columns. Again, it's up to you what you're trying to do, just to tidy up the table and make it a bit neater. So other things that you can do, you can clear the selected fields and move the pivot table to another location. So you can right click and you can move. You can move things up and down. So this is the headers here. So you can either select them, very tricky, and drag them down. Let's do that again. Select them. It's very tricky with this one. Drag them down there. So it'll change the order. Or you can right click and you can move them up and down. to here. So the other thing you can do under Analyze on the pivot table tools, you can clear the filters. If you have any filters selected, it will clear them all off. You can select the entire pivot table. You could move the pivot table to another location if you want to. So that's quite useful if you want to lift and shift or move around with those things. Some of the other things which might be quite useful in options here, if I just open it up, again maybe different with the Mac, but you can again change a lot of things in here. So you can set the auto fit, so every time it refreshes it will automatically size the columns. You can disable that once you've got those columns the right size. You don't want it continually readjusting. You might just want to keep it fixed. You can also click here for the grand totals and the filters as well. Display, you can show what's called a classic pivot table. So if I just click on that and click OK, what it does is it just pushes them out to the right. Now here it's got totals. Again, I don't particularly like that, but if you want to remove them, you can take away subtotals as opposed to just grand totals, and that will take them out for you. Again, it's a lot of things you can look at and play with as you explore. What other things do we have in here? We can set the print titles, so we can set all the printing settings we want to. In terms of data, we mentioned refreshing. What else have we got here? I think that's about it for that one, really. So looking into some of the values down here, so looking at the bottom right hand corner of the screen in the pivot table fields, you can adjust how the information is presented in the pivot table. So you can adjust how it's calculated. So if I do a drop down, value of field settings here, so you see the little arrow, it allows me to look into those. And if I go value, at the moment it's just counting, just counting the numbers in there, but I could do sum, which will add it all together. Average, again, if you want to get the average. Maximum, minimum, product, which is a multiplication, and a few other options there. Most of these you probably won't really get involved with, but it allows you to do those sort of things. Then you've got number format, which again allows you to change the format. So if you know it's going to be currency, you can set that up, or you can set it as a date if you know they're going to be dates, whatever it happens to be, or a percentage if you need to. And then you've got show values as, and you've got calculation, so you can do a calculation of the grand total, of the column total, row total, etc. So you can have a look at those different options down there. Again, depending very much upon what you're trying to achieve. The order of the fields can be moved by right-clicking on the column or the row setting and setting the order. So so again, same options to move the values of the fields up and down depending upon what you want to do. So this is something, again, I'm not too sure if it appears on the Mac version, but this thing called Slicer. So if I just click on this, you can pick, it's a bit like a filter, you can pick a number of different options from here. So let's say we take location, click on that, click OK. So that's now giving me a list of all locations. Now I can start to select these, and you can see the table starts to change and the graph starts to change. So in this case I've selected Wales, so it's everyone related to Wales in terms of the staff numbers, etc. So I could select more than one, I could select just one. So if I clear, there should be an option to do that. If I do control, yeah, so what I've just done there is I've pressed control on the keypad to select more than one, so I could pick several, and again it will chop and change how the information is displayed. Again, not too sure if it's a feature that's available on Mac, but it seems to be available on this one. called slicer tools here, and allows you to add things in. So as shown earlier, and here we've got it as the graph. There are many graphs you can generate from a pivot table, and what you'll tend to find though is that it will select all of the data in there. So unlike a graph that you produce from a table, for example here, you can choose the data you want and be very selective, whereas the pivot table covers everything, gets everything in there. So as you can see, this is particularly unfriendly in terms of a view. You might want to have a look at different graph options, and it's just useful to go around and have a look at some of the different possibilities here. They'll probably all look quite messy, I would imagine. Pie charts, for example, again, very colourful. It all depends upon how much data and what you want to represent. Other things you can do, you can look at the axis options. So if you look at the chart itself, you can see, right click on there, let's have a look, pivot chart tools, there we go. So we can start to look at chart elements over here, which add axis titles, chart titles, data labels, legends. There's quite a few different things down there. You can switch here, which if you switch the data, what it'll do is it will change the pivot table and change your chart view. It's a very quick way of changing the views. You can change the color schemes, automatic color schemes, depending upon what you want to do there. And you can select the data. If you end up deleting any of these, then I suppose it should filter, take the filter off, but I'm not sure if it'll allow me to take things off there. I don't think it does. Normally you can select data that you want in there. You can move the chart, change the chart type. What else can you do? So the Analyze tab, which is that one, is largely the same as the pivot table version. This allows you to choose different things. It's mainly the Design tab which helps in terms of formatting for that table there. So that's it. It's rather a quick blast through on pivot tables and how to use them, with a few other things thrown in, a few mistakes as well. But it's always useful to see mistakes in action, and then you can see how they're resolved. That's all there is. If you want to get back to me with any questions, and let me know, and I'll do what I can. Thank you.